Before I get into the best practices, I think it might be helpful to review some of the common pitfalls that we see holding back risk programs and assessments. So I'll touch on those first. The first one is by far the biggest issue we've seen, and that's overly complex risk assessments or overly complex programs. I've been able to see dozens of risk programs, and I can say that I've never seen one fail because it was too easy or too simple. On the other hand, I've seen many programs stumble because they were unnecessarily complex. Now, they may have been very elegant programs and made sense to the risk managers, but they lost their audience who found the program too confusing or too onerous. Remember how we started out, that people naturally start out with a negative connotation of risk, if they're business people and not experienced with risk. And so they're naturally apprehensive about the process already, and it doesn't take much to lose the buy-in. Incidentally, I mentioned earlier one of the pitfalls around integrated risk management, and this is one of the problems you can see. On the one hand, there's not always a huge benefit to linking all your risk data together. There can be, but there isn't always. But integrating all of your risk practices together will definitely increase your complexity. Now, there's ways to do it effectively, and we can speak to that after if anybody is interested in that. The second point really I'm going to make is related to the earlier one, and that's to be wary of jargon. You don't want to get too hung up on terminology. Now, risk management tends to attract process nerds like me, and we can sometimes do ourselves a disservice by getting too academic and too rigid with the labels that we put on things. A far better approach in our experience is to consider the perspective of your stakeholders and pick language and terms that make sense in their world. Now, it's fair, to be fair, it's important to have consistent definitions across your organization or within the organization, but the practice of risk management allows you to use your own judgment, and you can pick terms that make sense in your organization. Our third point is a challenging one because it's really affected by the mandate you have and the culture of your organization. But a common frustration we see among risk managers is that they're not able to get buy-in and acceptance from business managers for their role in the risk process. Risk management can end up getting viewed as the problem or the responsibility of the risk manager. And when this happens, risk managers fail to meet their primary objective, which typically is to instill a culture of risk-based management and risk-based decision-making. You can't build a risk management culture if business managers are going about their daily lives thinking that risk management is somebody else's problem. Next point is something we touched on earlier. Risk management is a continuous process, and if risk ratings aren't kept current and assessments aren't done regularly, then the whole process tends to fall apart. Without regular review by senior leadership, risk owners are going to lose their incentive to follow through on their action plans. The reality is, people want to do the right thing, but everybody is busy, and they're not going to spend time updating risks and updating actions if nobody is ever looking at it. And by the same token, once the risk information becomes stale, it's no longer trusted by the business, and it becomes far less useful. At some point, you basically end up having to start over again. And we see this quite often. A lot of times we get brought in when people are trying to sort of reignite or re-kickstart their risk program. And finally, the fifth item can also be a real challenge because many risk managers have to juggle multiple mandates. It can be challenging to show up and say, hey, I'm Jason, I want to be an advisor and I want to help you achieve your objectives, but I'm also a compliance officer and I'm going to be auditing you next week. So it's kind of challenging sometimes to balance that. It's one of the reasons why enterprise risk often functions or is most successful when it can be separated from compliance and audit activities. But a lot of ERM managers don't really have that luxury. The challenge can be managed, provided that the risk manager is mindful about those conflicts and has a plan from the start about how they're going to manage them.